The views expressed on this program are those of the producers and individuals appearing on this program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Sun Prairie Media Center staff, its video service providers, or the staff and elected officials of the City of Sun Prairie.
We're all familiar with the three whats: what it is, what it can do for me, and what does it cost. Tyler Rickinaw, Country Financial, can help you find the answers with insurance coverage to help protect what's most important to you, all at a price you can afford. So while you're juggling work and kids while trying to keep an eye on your financial future, Tyler Rickinaw, Country Financial, will make sure they are the first ones there when you need them most.
The kids are back to school, and your schedule is busier than ever. From daycare pickup, doctor's appointments, sports, and college tuition, a parent's signature is a powerful thing. Have you ever stopped to think, what would happen if you weren't able to provide one? With thoughtful estate planning, you can make sure that your child's health and education needs are met in the event of your absence due to a temporary incapacity or even death. The estate planning team at Hurley Burrish is here to help.
Fostering deeper relationships, influencing behavior change, developing resilience. You're about to start winning. Here is your host, Christine Bright.
Welcome to Parenting Game. I am so glad you are here. You're a parent who has deep faith and beliefs. How do you have these conversations with your child that's inviting? What do you do if your child starts to disregard your faith and beliefs? My guest today is Steve Berg. He is the student pastor at Heartland Church, and he's going to offer some great advice on how to navigate these conversations. Steve, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so you're new to Heartland.
I am.
New to Wisconsin.
New to Sun Prairie.
New to Sun Prairie.
Okay,
yeah. So where were you before?
So in Stevens Point. I actually lived in Stevens Point for myself, just 31 years.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm a Wisconsin kid through and through.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so I don't have to worry about you being freaked out about the weather or anything. Okay.
No, I just saw a memory actually came up on Facebook that 5 years ago this day, the church that I worked at then, we canceled church because there's 16 inches of snow.
Oh man.
So this was April 2018, if I remember correctly.
I remember lots of Easter egg hunts as a kid in the snow.
Right.
You know, you're wearing your like cute little dress and with your winter jacket and you gotta love Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah. And my kids are pure Wisconsin kids. So when the weather turns to like 50, my son is outside in a tank top and shorts. And it's just hilarious.
Yeah, my son never wore a winter jacket either. I love all the seasons, and I'll have to say, when we're rolling into April and that snow happens, I will get a little crabby about it. But I keep my Christmas decorations up until the end of February because then when it snows, I just I still can handle it.
Oh yeah.
But
I have a running competition that nobody in my neighborhood knows about who can keep up their Christmas lights the longest.
Oh, really?
And I always win because no one else knows that they're competing.
Oh,
but I intentionally keep my lights outside on very long. Too long, maybe, my wife would say.
Yeah, but it's festive. And who wants to take them down in the cold? I mean, come on.
I know.
And it's not safe. Yeah. It's icy. I think you're being very wise.
My reindeer just went into our garage last week. They weren't on. I didn't light them up, but they were still in my yard until last week. So.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I like you. I'm a big fan. So tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, so my wife and I, Steph, have been married for 13 years this summer. So we met at UWSP. She's went to school for education. I went to school for sociology. 2.5 years older than her, but we just met through a campus organization called Chruch.
Yes, I'm very familiar.
Yeah. So I met there, and then we got married in 2010, and then we have 3 kids. So Levi, who's 11, he's in 5th grade. Nora is 9, she's in 3rd grade, and then Ivy is 6, and she's in kindergarten.
Oh,
so
wow.
They're a blast. It's a super fun season, and it's fun for me because I've worked with teenagers all of my really adult life, and now my son is very much a preteen and entering that phase. So there's a big difference between working with teens and parenting one, right? And I've known that. I've known that cognitively, and now I'm entering into that. Oh yeah, it is different, and it's challenging, and it's messy, and it's crazy and beautiful and fun and all those things at the same time. So
it is. My son is 29 now.
Wow, yeah.
And I look back and I see all this gray hair, and I'm going, if I would have known now, then I wouldn't have stressed so much.
Yeah.
But you do. You just do. Excuse me. Share with us, first, it's a new question I love asking parents. Give yourself a little pat on the back.
Yes.
So share with us one thing as a parent that you're doing well.
Yeah, so there was a moment when Levi was, I want to say 5 or 6, when he came home from school, and he and my daughter were playing on the ground, and he reacted very strongly to something and actually like swore at her. And I remember as a parent, we're like, what happened? But I felt like in that moment, I was like, okay, how you react to this is really going to set the tone for the environment that our kids kind of grow up in. And so we just calmly talked to him. And I feel like something that Steph and I have really intentionally done since then has been saying to our kids, hey, like, you are never going to get in trouble for stuff you hear at school. You're never going to get in trouble for questions that you bring up. Like, this is a space where you can ask anything, talk about anything, bring anything home that you hear about, and we're not going to respond with, how dare you? And so we've tried really hard, I think, to foster an environment where our kids can have open conversations with us. And so I've seen that now as Levi, my oldest is becoming, again, a preteen, where he and I have had conversations in the car together where he's kind of asked me some questions. Well, hey, Dad, I've heard this at school that I would have never brought up to my parents. And I remember he said a couple months ago, he's like, Dad, I'm really glad we can talk about this. I don't think most boys can talk to their dads about this stuff. And so I was like, all right, we're doing okay. We're not perfect, but we're doing something right.
And it's good, having that psychological safety for your kids to bring us. And as a parent coach, I said, yes, you want that. Also mentally prepare for the stuff that you're going to get, because when they really trust you, they are going to bring
really
everything
bring
to
up
you.
Some stuff.
And I remember my son bringing me some conversations. And I'm like, I don't think these are conversations. I mean, I'm so honored that you trust me with this, but give me a second. I don't think moms should be having these conversations with their boys.
Right.
But now I see it now as a 29. He comes to me about his relationships, career. It's awesome. So fun now to be more of that friend and not have to parent him anymore. And it's so cool.
That's really
so
sweet.
Cool. So good for you. Give yourself a pat on the back. That's a good one. So share with us your pastoral journey, because you went to school for sociology?
Yeah, so I did undergrad for sociology, and then went to grad school in Deerfield, Illinois for a couple of years. So I got my master's in intercultural studies and Christian studies. It's kind of a dual master's program. Then from there, during my second year of my master's program, the church that I grew up in was planting a campus like 30 miles away from where I grew up going to church. So they had asked that I would come back and help launch that campus of being the youth pastor and the worship pastor. So for a year, for 2009, I was doing master's classes like Monday, Tuesday night I'd drive back to Stevens Point, which is about a 4-hour drive, do youth group Wednesday, worship team practice Thursday, lead worship Sunday, and Sunday night I'd drive to Chicago, do classes. So I did it for a year. I look back now, I was like, I could never do that again.
I know,
but
the stuff you can do when you're younger.
Yeah, 22. So
you don't need sleep.
No. Yeah, having kids reminds you of that too. You don't need sleep. So, so I was the youth and worship pastor at this church for 7 years, and then in 2016, we moved back to Stevens Point, where I oversaw like the creative arts department at the church I was at the time. And then 3 years ago at that church, I became the care pastor and then the senior high youth pastor again. So I've worked with students in a lot of different ways for the last 14 years. And then this November is when we moved here to Sun Prairie to do student ministries here.
Yay. Well, we are very happy to have you.
Cool. I'm happy to be here.
So, and I thank you for being so new to the role.
Sure.
I mean, not the role of being youth pastor, but at the church.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I snagged you. I mentioned earlier. It's like, well, he's probably still getting his feet wet in some things and doesn't have a lot of commitments. So let me hook you and get you on the show. But this is an episode that I have wanted to do for quite a while.
Yeah.
I have seen, and I know the conversations, it goes back to how the conversations happened when I was a kid, where it was more out of fear and instilling beliefs than me really being attracted to and invited into those beliefs. And it wasn't until I got older with my son, and part of my parenting story is I was seeing some poor parenting choices that I was pulling in from my childhood and realized I have to make a change. And one of those changes were conversations I was having with my son. I wanted them to be inviting. I didn't want him making decisions out of fear.
Right.
Now that's a whole nother conversation about like the good fear of accountability.
Right.
Like some of his decisions he makes is because he knows there's accountability there if he doesn't make them. But I didn't want him because he was afraid of how I would think about him or how I would react.
Yeah.
So going into those conversations, I want to ask you a question. Do you have a couple top don't do this as a parent when you're going to start having those conversations?
Yeah. I mean, I think, especially with teenagers, I think don't overreact is probably one of the most important things. I think the easiest and quickest way to shut a teenager down is to react really strongly when they bring things up. Even if internally as a parent you're like, I can't believe my kid said this or thought this or heard this. If they see you react strongly, right, just because of how their brains are wired and they are reacting very emotionally, they're not thinking rationally, and so they're gonna see even your facial expressions and it's gonna shut them down really, really quick. So I think parents, learning to just take a breath, absorb what the student said, and just say thank you for sharing is probably the best thing they can say. And so I think questions of like, where did you hear that? Like, why would you say that? Like, how could you say that? You know how we raised you. Those types of questions that are questioning the validity of the curiosity of the student, I think really shuts them down. So I think that's a big one. I think things that that parents do a lot of times, and this is probably a little bit more like 10,000 foot level, but it's when we as parents see the end game of parenting as 18, right? It's really easy as parents to think, okay, I've got kids in my house until they're 18. So I think that kind of rushes sometimes the way that we parent when we think I've got to have a fully formed, mature adult by the time they leave the house. When the reality is, right, we know from neuroscience, kids' brains aren't formed until they're 25 to 30, right? So I think as a parent, a principle of saying I need to parent longer and parent past 18 actually is one of the things that helps. And so I think most parents rush decisions in their kids. I think they try to force belief into their kids. I think I think that can be pretty harmful. I think the other thing I would say, as simple as it is understanding like context of when and where you're having a conversation with your kid. As simple as this is like my son, I will not have hard conversations in the morning, right? Like he's tired. Like the best place for me to have a conversation is he and I either going to Buffalo Wild Wings, going to get chips and salsa, where it's just me and him and we can talk and have a real good conversation. So I think not thinking about context, not understanding like when our kids are like they're awake and they're alert and they're ready. I think that's a big mistake parents make a lot of times. They just think immediately, I need to close this conversation right now. I need to have a solution, instead of saying, let me just wait and give space for this. So,
with that rushing piece too, often as parents, we think in this 24-hour period, we need to shut this down. We need to take care of this now. We need to solve it now today. We can't let it linger. And just through my years of working with kids and families, time and space is your friend.
Absolutely.
We think if we don't address it right now, I'm undermining my authority. Can you speak into that a little bit about taking time and space for these conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's been helpful with me as a parent, I heard a author, speaker named Andy Stanley say this, right?
Big fan,
right? So
Big
maybe
fan.
You've heard this, how he talks about the different stages of parenting, that says 0 to 5 is the discipline stage where you're really starting to teach your kids, like, hey, there's consequences for your actions. And then 6 to 11, I think he calls the training phase, where you start to say, okay, there's these expectations that we do have on you, but we have to teach you how to do those. And so you actually it's still the season of really wonder and play, and so you actually get to practice them with your kids. So he talks a lot about how, hey, if we're gonna go out to dinner and we hope our kids act a certain way when we're out to eat, practice it at home. Actually role play and do it. Kids like to play, and that's okay. So that's the training phase. But then the teenage years, that 12 to 18, he calls the coaching phase, where you kind of step back a little bit and say, okay, now you have to experience practicing these things, and part of that is failure. And so I think as parents, I just think failure is our friend with our teens a lot of times, and allowing them to experience some natural consequences. And then we as parents actually get to, instead of being the one to like lay a heavy hammer, we get to grieve with them. Just say, that's hard. Like, man, that's confusing. That's okay. Like, oh man, that stinks that you're experiencing. That's all right. Let's talk. Like, you become then a place for them to come when they're hurting, as opposed to being the one that like lays down a heavy hammer. So I think when you're willing to let your kids, especially at that season of life, ask questions, fail, try things out, and you just kind of give them space to do that, it actually allows you to take the posture of really someone that's safe for them and grieving with them. So I also think one of the best phrases I've heard is that kids need our wisdom and we need their wonder, right? So I think
like
there's
that.
value in like when our kids ask questions, to say to them, that's a really good question. Like, even to say when I've said to my kids, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. And then when I come back a week later and say, hey, remember when you asked that? Like, I've thought about that. Here's what I thought. Here's how I came to this conclusion. Because the big thing with our kids is we want to teach them how to answer questions, not just give them answers, right? We want to teach them how to think. So I think space, it just is so valuable to not have to close every conversation with a solution, but to let our kids wonder and to wonder with them. And then that means there's another conversation we get to have. And that's the beauty of it, is we get to have this continued conversation. So I think thinking long term, again, I think is behind that is a huge principle of like, slow down. Like, you're with them for a while. You will forever, as a parent, be the number one influence in your kids' lives, and you get to be their parent until they're 60. The reality is, right? So when you think long term like that, you have different phases of parenting, but you will forever be the most influential person in your kid's life, I think.
Yeah.
So
And when you have that type of thinking too, then you're going to have more of, as they grow and that mature and that sharing and being, if you set up where you're inviting them into these conversations, you know, I see some parents who are having those struggles, and it's like, they don't call me. They don't. Well, most likely it wasn't inviting when they were growing up, so they don't know how to invite you in. Now that they're growing, you know, these things space out. So let's get back into this faith piece. When they're littles, that 0 to 5. Talking about faith and is easy peasy, right? You got the books, you got the storybooks. I always say flannel graph. Does anybody remember a good flannel graph? I'm still down for a good flannel graph. And it's easy, and they're not questioning, and everything's cool, and it's like, oh, Noah and the ark, that's like awesome, and like totally that dude could live in the belly of the whale. Then panic will set in when our children are getting older, they're learning, and now they're questioning. And often as parents, we don't have the answer, and then we react to them out of panic. So share as your child grows. What do you do? Like, what do you do? Is it okay? Do you, you know, I mean, I think a lot of times we look at it as like, I'm failing, you know, my kid, depending on how deeply rooted your beliefs are. So speak into that, because I know you're the middle school. I'm sure these are constant conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know, what's funny is I think one of the best pathways forward in this context, it kind of begins with some like self-work, right? You know, I think a lot of times as a parent, you know, I have these hopes for my kid. And so my reactions to questions come from a deep sense of like, I want to control them, you know? And I think we as parents, I think with really good motives, want what's best, but what's really hard is to settle into this space that says, no matter how perfectly I parent, like, they are an individual and they're going to make their own choices, and I have to kind of let go of control. Like, I know that my kids, for them to follow Jesus, like, there has to be something kind of like that God does that I can't control, right? So I think it starts with me learning to let go of a little bit of control with my kids. Honestly, that's the first thing. And then I think it's me as a parent having community in my own life where I can express my fears and frustrations. Like, my kids don't need to see those reactions. When my son asks the question and my brain goes, I can't believe you would ask that, or I can't believe you saw that, or some kid showed you that. He doesn't need to see that. But I also need a space where I can like get that out. So I think one of the most healthiest things for parents is, do you have people in your life where you can go with those things? Because if you don't have a space to express the tensions and the frustrations and the fears of parenting, that's gonna come out towards your kid, right? So I think those are two things that we as parents need to start doing ourselves. And then again, when our kid comes with those questions, I think just saying to our kids, like, thank you for asking that. And saying, that's a great question. I love that you're asking that question. Like, tell me what you're thinking about that right now. And not saying to them, why would you ask that? I think honoring the fact that our kids are being curious and they're trying to discern this, and saying that is actually a really good thing, as opposed to shaming them and shutting that down. Because we can't stop that from happening. What we can stop is that happening with us, right? Like, our kids are going to ask questions no matter what. Our kids are going to be curious no matter what. So you can't stop that as a parent. But what you can do as a parent is stop them from telling you that that's happening. So I think as a parent, it's just, again, creating an environment where my kids ask questions, no matter how scary or how much it like terrifies me, is just saying, that's a great question, man. Thank you so much for asking that. Like, tell me what you're thinking about that. Like, where did you hear that question? What do your friends say about that? Like, why do you think that question is important? You know, and even helping them learn, like, how do I answer that? And then sometimes saying, you know what, buddy, let's talk about this tomorrow. You know, let's come back. Hey, let's set up another time. You know, let's do something fun together. Let's go to a baseball game. Let's go get chips and salsas, is what I do a lot with my kids. And let's talk about this again, because it's important. And I love that you're asking that question. So again, just honoring and elevating the fact that they are asking that and have the courage to bring it up, I think is so unbelievably important. But then when the terror inside of you, have a space to get that out. Like, have friends where you can say that to, so your kids don't see it. Right?
Absolutely. So, well, you know, managing ourselves first, and then being able to talk to our kids. I want to go back to a few things that you had mentioned. We do unintentionally shame our kids. It happens. I even still have caught myself mid-conversation with my son now, or with friends, where out of goodness, we just have to watch our words and shame. What detriment does that do if your child now believes something and it's rooted in shame?
Gosh, man, that's a great question. You know, I think what that does, with shame, there's a difference between guilt and shame, right? Guilt says I've done something wrong. Shame says I am wrong. It is this internalizing personal, there's something core in who I am that is wrong. So what that means is then anytime a question comes up, because that was the context with which shame was spoken, anytime a question comes up in a kid's mind, they're going to say, this is not a safe space. This is not a place where I can go. So again, what they're going to do is they're going to have to figure it out somewhere else. They're not going to figure it out with your wisdom and your kindness and your love for them. So they're going to go somewhere else. And chances are they're going to go online, right? Kids have supercomputers in their pockets right now that give them opinions about anything, right? So they're going to go there. They're going to go to their friend. They're going to resolve that by simply, what do my friends say? They're going to resolve that simply by what do people around me say. They're going to resolve that by what makes me feel like I fit in the most, instead of saying, I don't need to resolve it right now. I can sit in this tension, and my mom and dad love me and they care about me, and it's okay to ask these questions. And we as parents know their answer to the question as a 13-year-old, it's going to change. Maybe within 6 months, maybe within 6 weeks. Like, they're just so constantly changing. So when we shame them, it just shuts down the space in my relationship with them for them to ask questions. When we as parents, we want them to come to us. So I think one of the things we have to ask is like, man, what am I willing to do to be the person that my kids will call when stuff hits the fan? Like, how far am I willing to wait and resolve in my own soul that I'm just gonna be patient and love them, so that when the big questions come and they really need help, they're like, man, mom and dad, they were the ones. I need to go to them first.
Absolutely.
And we have to grapple with that as parents.
And then do you find, because I have this conversation with parents quite a bit too, if I don't have the answer, or if I tell them I need to go find the answer, that undermines my authority.
I would say the opposite is true, honestly. I think, especially for teenagers nowadays in a culture where they're constantly able to, get answers to things really quick, right? So that in teens' brains almost starts to form, they're like, I should be able to know this. So that's part of questions for teens sometimes. It's like, man, I don't know the answer. Everybody has answers for everything. So I think when we humanize uncertainty, I honestly think for our kids, it's like, oh, you don't know either? Okay, you're a safe space then. You're like me a little bit because I don't know as a teen. And if my parents are saying, you know what, I don't know either sometimes, I don't think that undermines it. I think that elevates you as a safe space. And I think teens especially, they can smell inauthenticity from a mile away. So I think it postures you as somebody who is authentic with them, who is safe to them, and actually makes them want to come back to you. Because honestly, sometimes kids don't always want an answer. Sometimes they just want to know it's okay to not know. And I think that is super important. So I think it does the opposite. I don't think it takes away your space of authority in their life. I actually think it makes you the person they're going to want to keep coming back to.
Well, you bring up another point too. Is it okay to let your kid share and say, do you want to answer? Or you just let me know this is what you think?
Yes, it's totally okay to do that. And I think it's totally okay. You learn your kids, right, more and more. I think that is one of the things we as parents, we have to constantly be students of our kids. And so, learning okay, is this just something he's heard or she's heard and they're just trying to is it safe for me to say this here? Or is this something that they have really thought through and they're trying to get an answer? I think you have to learn that. And each kid is different, right? So I think that's the lesson for me as a parent is I need to learn my kid. I need to know well and know when they're doing that. And it's okay to ask that. Hey buddy, is this something you want to know what I think? Or you just do you want to know it's okay to ask this question? And they may not know, but I think even you asking that, again, postures you as someone who's not just there to fix problems for them, but there to coach them and love them.
So we're going to go a little deeper. You and I are both we consider ourselves Christ followers. So we have a deep faith in believing in the Bible. Jesus died, was resurrected. And with sharing the faith, there's a lot of questions around that. Why do you believe the Bible's true? How can you believe the resurrection happened? There are so many resources out there. How do you feel about, because as parents, we know we want to spout off what we know. What's your thoughts on making it maybe a re-journey for yourself of grounding yourself on why you believe and taking that journey with your kids instead of just saying, well, this is what I believe and you should believe it too. And maybe going, hey, this is what I believe. Can I share with you why?
I think, so Deuteronomy 6 is a parenting passage that's always meant a lot to me, where, it says, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And it says, talk about these things with your kids when you sit, when you rise. So I think it's saying, let it be just normal conversation, not just hey, we're going to talk about this on Sundays. We're going to have a very formal, but I think having that conversation be this is just normal. We just talk about, hey man, I think God created that and Jesus is teaching me this. And so I think when you make it normal and less formal, I think it allows for space.
I like that. That is really great.
Start to do that themselves, right? And then I think a big part of it is just inviting your kids into I will get up at 5:15 and read the Bible, and just by myself, that's my time with Jesus. But anytime my kids come, I'm hey, sit with me. And I don't force, sometimes they want to read a different book, and I'm it's okay. It's all right. And sometimes I try to tell them, I think this is really good for you guys. You should try to read this. But also I tell them, it's hard to understand. It's okay to say it, because I think that's part of it for kids. And we want to hand faith to them. And then for them, it's okay, here's what that means. And then they start to read the Bible and they're whoa, this is language I don't understand. These are stories. This is confusing. And I think my dad and mom knows everything. So then it's almost what's wrong with me? So I almost think we have to tell our kids, you know what, guys, faith it's uncertain sometimes. It's hard. It's messy. It's okay. So ask the questions about it, but saying to them, this has to be yours. And I try to tell my kids, guys, I think following Jesus is the absolute best thing for you. I want you to believe that. So I'm going to try to teach you how to live that way, and I want you to experience it. But I also tell them it's confusing sometimes. That's okay. It has to be something you choose. And if you don't choose it someday, you know what? I want to love you like crazy. And I've told my kids that.
Okay. I could talk to you
I know.
forever.
Keep
That
going.
is this ending was such great advice for parents. I appreciate it, and I wanted to let you keep rolling. But go ahead and share with us the website where they can find out more about you and children's ministry.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have like a personal website, so you can go to weareheartland.us. That's our church's website. But I think the best thing is if you want to have conversations about this, if you want to talk to me about, I love talking about raising teens to love Jesus. So you can shoot me an email. My email is steve@heartlandsunprairie.com.
Perfect.
So that's where you can get a hold of me. Shoot me an email and just say, hey, I saw you on TV, let's talk. And I would love to get coffee and talk to you about it. So.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for tuning into the Parenting Game.
We're all familiar with the 3 whats: what it is, what it can do for me, and what does it cost. Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, can help you find the answers with insurance coverage to help protect what's most important to you, all at a price you can afford. So while you're juggling work and kids while trying to keep an eye on your financial future, Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, will make sure they are the first ones there when you need them most.
The kids are back to school, and your schedule is busier than ever. From daycare pickup, doctor's appointments, sports, and college tuition, a parent's signature is a powerful thing. Have you ever stopped to think, what would happen if you weren't able to provide one? With thoughtful estate planning, you can make sure that your child's health and education needs are met in the event of your absence due to a temporary incapacity or even death. The estate planning team at Hurley Burish is here to help.
Thank you for watching The Parenting Game. All episodes of The Parenting Game are available on demand at sunprairiemediacenter.com.